Hello, my name is Xander. Welcome back to the Django 4X ORM Mastery course, YouTube edition. In the first part of this case study, we worked through 10 stages to design the database. After we designed the database, we went ahead and implemented the database using the Django framework. You will find the first case study tutorial in the link in the video description. That would take you to the playlist for the Django ORM Mastery course. In this tutorial, we now focus in on querying our database. This is the first query, so it is fairly simple, but I wanted to give a little bit more. So here in this tutorial, we're going to learn how to select all products and return all items or all objects from a particular table. Now, to add and to extend that knowledge for anyone who is new to Django, I will go through an example where we implement that query into a Django project. So we're going to go ahead and create a URL, a view, a template, and that then will help us explore how we can take the data from the database using a query and then go ahead and implement it within a Django project. In addition to that, because we are collecting a lot of data from the database, you're probably going to ask me, well, how do I paginate that data? How do I split up that data into multiple pages? So I will take you through the basic process, just utilizing some of the core Django tools to paginate the data that's returned from the database and to then display that and make that available on the template. I will apologize in advance. It's always going to be very difficult to answer any of your questions where you're trying to potentially extend or make some changes to meet your particular project. So I do recommend going over to our Discord channel. There should be a link from the main channel. And in addition to that, you can always try Stack Overflow. That's always a good place to ask questions. If you would like to learn more about the Django ORM, how to interact with databases with plenty of examples, then please do check out our Django course. There is a link in this video description. Now, I always recommend to use our link in the video description because it should always give you the best price. If you would like to follow along step by step, the first thing to do is have a look in the video description. You'll find a link to the code base. Go ahead and download the code, extract that to a folder, and then have that ready in Visual Studio Code. I've opened up Visual Studio Code. I've already downloaded the code from the link in the video description. I've made a new folder on my desktop, so I just need to press open here and find that folder. Now I have the folder open here. I'm using a Mac, so I'm going to create a new virtual environment. I'm presuming you have Python installed, of course. So yeah, we're going to run vmv. If you're running Windows, it should be the same command. Maybe you just don't need to type in Python 3. You can just type in py instead of Python 3. So go ahead and do that. We create a new virtual environment, and then we need to activate it. So if you're running Windows, you're going to type in vmv backslash. Oh, I thought I typed in vmv backslash and then scripts. You can use tab and it will find the file, the command or the folder, the file, and then activate. So that's going to activate it on Windows. Here on the Mac, I'm going to type in source vmv bin and then activate. Okay, so it should now be activated, your virtual environment. So we can go ahead and pip install because there isn't a requirements file. We only need Django here and Pillow. So pip install Django and then Pillow. Okay, so just to double check that's installed properly, we can type in pip freeze and then requirements.txt. That's going to make a new file and it's going to tell me all the different dependencies or the different libraries or modules that I've just downloaded. So we've got Pillow, we've got Django, we're ready to go. You will notice that when you download the code from the link in the video description, there's already a database. It's already populated. It's all ready to go. But if you do want to start completely fresh, then what you can do is you can go over to the inventory app here, go to migrations, just remove the initial migration. So just delete that. And then in addition to that, you can just go ahead and remove the SQL file. Right, so I have created a management command. All this information is in the previous tutorial, how to make all of this, but Python 3, and then the management command is called load fixtures. So we can go ahead and load fixtures like that. Oh, sorry, apologies. I'll do that again. I've forgotten the command. 1 second. Okay, so Python 3, manage.py, and then load fixtures. Apologies. Okay, so there we go. So that's going to create all the databases, it's going to load all the fixtures, so all the data into the database. That's what we have here, and we're ready to go. As we have already established, we have already built this in the previous tutorial. And of course, you can go and check out that tutorial if you haven't already, if you would like to know how to design and build this database. So here we have the product table. In this tutorial, we're going to query this table. We're going to select all the data, all the products from this table, and then we're going to learn how to actually implement that within our Django project to output it to a template. You may already be familiar with Django. You may or may not know that we can practice the queries or build queries in the shell. So that's where I tend to showcase the query first in the shell. So we do have the Python 3 manage.py and then shell. So here we've created a shell, and now we can interact with our Django project. So don't forget the manage.py and then shell. Okay, so now we have the shell open. First of all, we need to bring the resources in. So we would like to utilize the products table. Now, what we need to remember here is that the e-commerce project, the main project folder here, we have the applications inside the main project folder, and that might be a different structure to what you're used to when you're building Django applications. So for me personally, I prefer to work this way, or in actual fact, one level deeper in this sometimes, depending on the application. Right, so what we need to do is we need to import from e-commerce, because we want to go into the e-commerce project, and then inventory, and then .models. So there's a file called models in there. We want to then go ahead and import the product table. So that's going to make that product table available in the shell, and we can now go ahead and run our query. So project dot, and then use the default manager, objects, and then just .all. So something really simple here. So if I run this, you can see that project is not defined because I typed in project and not product. So let me do that again. Right, so product, there we go. So import product. So if you're wondering how I enter that command so quickly, I press up and down on the keyboard. Right, so product.objects.all, there we go. And you can see that returns a whole heap of stuff here. So that's selected all the data from the database, and it's now returned all those objects. So what you're looking at here is a list of objects, which we could then utilize or iterate over and display on our template. Okay, so that's a little bit confusing in terms of so much data on the screen. So let's go ahead and do this again, but we're going to, I pressed up, and then I pressed function on mine, and left and right to go to the end. So I can quickly go to the end, and then equals, so x equals, and then the query. So now everything is being stored in this variable. So what I can now do is explore this data. So remember, what we have returned here is a list of objects. So what we can do, like we would do in Python to maybe explore a list, we could select an item utilizing this type of syntax here. So let's select the first item in our list that's returned into X here. So we could do that. And then, for example, we could now have a look at that first item. Now, we know that there are some fields in every single object that we return, and those fields are defined, of course, in our model. So we have a look in here, go down to our product, we can see these are the fields that are available. So let's go ahead and just print out the name of the first object that's returned from the database. And there we go. So that's the first name. Now I could do exactly the same thing for description, slug, and so on. So I could have a look at the slug. It just allows me to explore the data. If you're not familiar with utilizing this type of syntax or exploring lists, then there is a course on this channel. I'm not trying to advertise. There is a course on this channel. You'll find the Python introduction course. There is a whole tutorial based around how to work with lists and how to kind of extract and explore data in a list. For those who would like to, let's now go ahead and implement this query into our project. So this is designed for beginners. We're now going to go through the process of building a new URL so that we can navigate to our template. We create a view to actually handle the request from the user so that we can then return back the template to the user with the data. We'll then build a template, so the actual kind of HTML page, and we'll go ahead and in this tutorial we're going to use Bootstrap to very quickly copy and paste some code in from the Bootstrap library to build a very neat set of boxes that will create a grid that we can utilize to iterate over the data that we return from the database and present that to the user in the template. And then finally, we go through pagination. So the idea that here is that we're going to return 50 in this case, because in our data set we have 50 products. But of course, we don't necessarily want to show 50 products on the screen. Maybe we want to separate that up into pages. So we're going to use some really simple techniques, which in actual fact is just a copy and paste of the example on the Django documentation. And we'll go ahead and we'll build a pagination feature. So we start off by building the URLs so that we can capture a user request and then pass them back a template. So if you are new, what generally happens, the user makes a request. Now that request might look something like this, for example. So port 8000 typically. So that's our request. Now this is a request from a user, and this slash then will represent that they are looking for this directory, the root directory. So we could return back something based upon this root directory. So here what we're going to do is we're going to create a new directory or a new URL, which is going to capture this right here. So the user will send off this request. This request will then get captured by Django, and then Django will inspect this request, particularly this component here of the request, and then it will search the URLs that it knows of that we define, and if it finds a match, it's then going to pass that off over to the corresponding view. So typically what happens here is that we define our URL, and then basically we define a match. So if someone does type this in here, this URL, we can then direct them to a view. So generally in Django, we connect the URL to a view. In our view, we're going to create a simple function, which is going to return a template.html that we create. So it's going to request and return this template back to, let's just say, the view here. And then what we're going to do in our view, we're also going to collect the data from the database. So let's just use this here, DB, database. So we go ahead and request and collect that. We then add all that data onto the template. And then what we can do is we can then pass that back over to the user. So let's build our new URL. Now what we're going to do here is that Django comes by default, the project has a URL file, but what we want to do is we want to extend that file. So if you remember, we built a new app, and that app was the inventory app. So if I go ahead and do that, and then I'm just going to set that send to the back. So this is now going to represent our app. This is the inventory app. So what we're going to do in the inventory app is we're going to create a new URL file. So we're going to extend the URLs, and Django is now going to look for not only the URLs inside the main project, but it will also look for the URLs in the inventory app. So hopefully it will make a match, and then we can then, if I can do that, we can then go ahead and direct our URL to a view. So this is the inventory app right here. So back in our project, first of all, we need to go to the e-commerce project, go into the URLs, get rid of all this, and then let's add in include. So that's going to allow us to then include a new URL file. So let's go for path, and then this is going to be query. Okay, so that's part of the URL that the user needs to type in to access these queries. And then we simply say include, and then we just need to tell Django what to include. So our project inventory is inside of e-commerce. So e-commerce.inventory. And then in inventory, we've got a file, which we will make in a minute, called URLs. So basically we're just including that file here. And by doing that, Django is going to look for all the URLs in here and then all the URLs here. Now it looks like we've got a problem. So we're going to need a comma here, and that should fix that there. Let me just zoom in a bit so you can see it. And there we go. So now we need to actually build this file. So let's go into inventory, right click, new file, urls.py. So that's the file that we were referring to right here. So we can close this now. Let's go into the URLs. So in here, we're going to define a new URL, and then we're going to attach that to a view. All right, so let me just zoom in a little bit more. So from Django .urls, let's import path so we can actually build. And then from .views, dot is referring to this folder. Remember, our URLs are inside the same folder as views. So from dot, import views. And that's going to give us access to the functions that we create in our view. So URL patterns equals, and now we need to find a new pattern. So path, and then we're going to call this example 1. So in total, the user will need to type in, if you remember, query to get to these URLs, and then /exe1. So that's the path that we've created. You need to remember the additional path in the other URL file that we created. So we now need to attach this URL to a view. So I'm going to call this all products. That's our query. If you remember, we return all products. And that should be views. So that's our views, our URLs completed. So we now have an ability for someone to type in to the URL, example 1 / so someone's going to type that in as a request. That information is going to be sent in the request information over to Django. Django is going to capture that, look in the main URLs, and then it's going to look in the include URLs from the inventory app. And now we're going to attach that to a view. So let's go into our views. There shouldn't be anything in the views to begin with. So we're going to make a new view, just a function here, all products. If you remember, that was a name that we created in the URLs. So we attached the URL to this function. So all products. And we are going to need to pass in request, just the request information from the user that we might need to work with. And let's go ahead now and make a query. So this is where our query comes in. Remember products, if I can spell it, product.objects.all. Remember, that is the query that we learned earlier that enabled us to be able to collect the data from the product table. Now what we're going to need to do is obviously make that available, that model. So dot models, remember dot is referring to this folder. The views is in the same folder as the model. So just dot models, and then let's import the product table, the product Django model, or the product class. Okay, right, so now we have that. We've now run our query. We now have returned that data in object. Right, so let's go ahead now and, well, let's just return to begin with, and then we'll build the pagination in a while. So return, render, request. So return the request, and now we need to make a template. So we're going to call this grid output. Yeah, let's call it grid output.html. So that's a template we're going to use. And then we need to also define the actual data. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to call, so what we need to do first here, first of all, we need to identify the name that we're going to utilize in order to reference that data in our template when we build the template. So I'm just going to call that obj, and then I need to pass that data into that. So here I'm basically making a key value, and this key is going to be utilized, kind of capture or to utilize that data in the template, and we'll see that in a minute. So I'm just going to say obj. So this is a reference here to this variable which is storing all of our product data. Okay, so we can see all of it. Let me just get rid of that. There we go. Okay, so now we have our simple view. We now need to go ahead and build a template. So for that, we're going to create a new folder inside of our inventory. We're going to call this templates. There we go. And then inside of here, we need to make a new file, if you remember. And I'm going to call that grid output.html. Simple. Right. So now we need some HTML. So for this, we're just going to go over to Bootstrap. So Bootstrap, yep, I do. Bootstrap. Let's go into Bootstrap. This is, if you haven't utilized Bootstrap before, it is a framework which allows us to rapidly create websites. So let's go into the examples. You can see in the examples here, we have this example, or is it down here? Yeah, album. So we're going to utilize album, not the blah, blah. Go down on this. Okay. Yeah, there's album here, custom components, album. So we're going to use album. Right, so you can see from album is there's going to create a nice little grid for us, a responsive grid, which is going to be nice. So we're going to utilize this as a basis to build our e-commerce store. So the first step is to download. So go ahead and download the examples. So once you've downloaded the folder, extract the folder. Here you can see we've got a number of different things here. And what we're going to be looking for is the album. So it's right at the bottom here. So there's an index file. So just grab that and maybe we can just drag that into templates. If I can find it. Go on up. Nearly. Okay, so I'm just going to drag that into templates. Now you could just use the directory structure, the Finder, if you're on Windows, to copy and paste that in, but it needs to be in that folder here. So you can see this is the file that's now inside of the templates here. So what we're going to do, in actual fact, let's just get rid of this grid output because we're just going to rename this. So I'll get that name and I'm just going to rename this file to grid output. That's the file name that we should be utilizing. And we're going to make some amendments here. You can see there are some assets that we need to bring in to this template to get it to work. So what I'm going to do is press Command F to do a find, or Shift F I think is on Windows. And I'm going to look for .. And you can see that there's one here. So I'm just going to remove that for now. Don't need that. And I'm just going to go to the next one. And yep, just get rid of that because it's going to be in a separate folder, different folder structure, sorry. And there's a third one here that we don't need to worry about. No, we don't need to worry about the third one. So make sure you get rid of those two dots next to the assets. Okay, we'll press save there. So what we're going to need to do now is to set up our static files. Static files, CSS files, JavaScript files, these are served to our web page, and we need to create a new folder for this, static. So that's going to be outside of the e-commerce folder here. Okay, so that's our static folder. Now Django is already partly set, for this. So Django knows to serve the static URLs equals static /, but there is a second setting that we're going to need to define for this, and that's the static file directory. So we can apply that in, just like that. Oh, hello, sorry. Okay, so we set up our static files directory. So that's that done. So these are static files that we can connect our template to. Like I said, CSS files, JavaScript files, and we can serve that to the user. So in our folder now, what we need to do is go back to our files, and we need to look for a folder called assets. And inside of here is all the different JavaScript and CSS elements that this page uses. So I'm just going to drag that out and then put that into my static folder. Okay, so it's now in my static folder. So assets folder is inside of static. Good. And now we've got all the things inside of there. So you can see when we go back to the template here, I will stop doing that. You can see that the folder structure matches what's inside of assets. So inside of assets here, we've got we've got assets. So assets, inside of assets, we've got the dist folder and then the JS and so on. So we're ready to go there. So everything should be nicely hooked up now. So let's just give us a go and see if we can get this working. So I just exit that and then I clear that. And then let's go for Python 3 manage.py run server. So it looks like everything is working okay. So let's go back here, 127 and then 8,000. Okay, you remember the path is query. So /query/ and then ex1. And you can see we are shown the file, or the template, sorry. But you can see that the CSS isn't working properly at the moment. So in order to activate static files in our template, let me just remove all this stuff. In our template, we need to define at the top static so that we can actually utilize static assets. So we need to load static assets. Okay, so just load static. And now when we go back in here, we need to actually define static. So essentially static here, we're just defining the path to static. And then this obviously ends the path to the resource. So here what we need to do is just embrace this. And we need to bring in static, which is going to be replaced with the URL if you like. And then we need to bring in our resources. So let's bring that in. Static, and then we'll put this into a single. And there we go. So hopefully now, I remember we need to do this once more at the bottom, I think it was. So let's just find asset. Yep, at the bottom here, line 292. So we need to do the same thing here for the JS. So I'll bring that in, and then I'll just copy this inside. Okay, so with that done, hopefully now we should need to restart the server. Let's go back into our page, we'll refresh, and there we go. So everything is now activated. You can see this is a responsive layout. If you were to reduce the size of your browser window, that would be nice and responsive. So let's just make some small changes. I'm going to get rid of this album example. I'm going to rename album to e-commerce, and then we can go ahead and have a look at how we can utilize our data to actually iterate over the data we return from the database and then display it here in this nice grid. So let's go back. So this is our template. So I'm just going to remove that for now. Oh no, we need that. So let's go into our template. Apologies. Up the top somewhere. It should be nicely presented so that we have a header section. Okay, so that's the header. That's going to be the top section, the menu bar. So let's call this e-commerce. This is line 101. So I'll change the name, and it looks like the image is right there. So I change that, I remove that, refresh. Now we just have e-commerce. So in the main section, looks like we have a section here at the top. That's going to be the container up the top here. So I'm just going to remove that section from line 111 to 122. So that's going to be the top section here that's going to now be removed. And now we can start thinking about getting our data from the database and displaying it right here. So we have already set that up. We have already created our query, returning the data, and we're passing that over here so we can access it in our template. So we can access that data through this word here, objects. So let's do that next. Right, so first of all, we need to determine, let's bring this down, we need to determine what these individual elements are so that we can remove them all. And then what we need to do is iterate over our data from the database. And for each item, each object that's returned from the database, we need to add one of these boxes. So if we look down, we can see we've got some rows and we've got these columns. And you can see we've got one column there, one column there, one column there. So for each box here, that represents one of these columns. So let's just go ahead, and from the bottom, there should be 9 of these columns. I'm just going to remove them. So I'm selecting them here and I can see where it starts and ends. So I'm just going to go up, and eventually I've gone too far. So eventually I've got to this top column. So this is where the top column starts, the first one. This is where it ends. So I'm just going to stop at line 131. And what I should have now is just one box. Good. So I now know the code that's needed in order to actually create one of these boxes. Right, so what I need to do now is I need to grab my data. And like I said, for each object that's returned from the database, we're going to iterate over this. We're going to iterate and return one of these boxes, print one of these boxes to the template. Right, so to do this, we simply just need to add some Python here. It's simply just a for loop. So let's do that. So let's go ahead and add that for product, or whatever, it can be whatever you like here, blah, blah, blah. For product, if you're not familiar to Python, in, and then that's a reference to our data that we passed over, queried, sent the data across, and now we just need to end this. So let's end. Have I got this on? I have, yeah. Okay, so that's the Django extension that I have installed. So just go to extensions, type in Django. It's a Django extension, I believe that's allows us to write these short words here to produce the code. Right, so there we go. There we go. So what should happen now is, because we have 50 items in our database, this should loop round 50 times, because for each item that's been returned, each object that's returned from a database, we've got 50 objects in here now. So we're just going to iterate over that 50 times with this loop. So what we end up with is this. So that now represents 50 boxes, 50 objects that are returned from the database. And obviously now what we need to do is replace this data with the actual data that's returned in each object. So let's get rid of this text here, and then let's change this. So in order to access that data, product, and then dot, don't forget that needs to be in the doubles, product, dot, and then, for example, name. So let's go back, refresh, and you can now see I've got all the names of the individual products. Right, so with that in place, you can make some other changes to this by all means, but let's just head straight now to the pagination. Actually, let's just do one thing first. Maybe you want to add more than 3 items at this level. What you'll find with Bootstrap, if you're not familiar with this or working with grids, is that you can see that at a really small scale, there's just one item. So at a mobile size, there's only going to be one box per row. At the small size, and you'll need to look at the breakpoints of Bootstrap to work this out. So this is refers to a breakpoint SM. It's around about, what, 600 pixels, something like that. So at 600 pixels, say, this small version, there's going to be 2 boxes on the screen. And for everything else, there's going to be 3. So we can change this. Let's go for 4, for example. So if I change that to 4, we now have 4 across, and so on. So you can go ahead and change those settings. Okay, right, so let's go back into the code, and now let's talk a little bit about pagination. So we don't necessarily want so many on one page, so we can go ahead and just separate this into separate pages. So we're going to break up this 50 into separate pages through pagination. So let's go back into our views. So let's bring in from the Django core. I think it's from Django core. Django core. Yeah, paginator. Let's import the paginator. Happy days. So we can now go ahead and define some of the parameters of our paginator. So for example, how many products we want to show per page. So let's say paginator equals paginator. And then we're going to pass in our objects, our data from our database. And then we're going to define how many we want per page. Let's go for 8. So now we've done that. We've separated that out. So now we need to kind of define some other aspects. So equals request.get page. So here we're defining and setting up so that we can access different pages. So page underscore object equals paginator dot get page number. Okay, so let me just go to the Django documentation. If we just type in Django paginator, that takes us to the top page here. And it gives you a bit of a breakdown of what we're trying to do here in the different settings, as well as an example. So it'd be well having a little read of that, all the different functions that are available. It looks like we're following very similar to what has been completed here, or in the example right here. Okay, so with that set, we can now go ahead and pass that back. So we just change that now. change the context there. And then we'll go back into our template. We just need to change this. So we're now referring it to page opt. We don't have to do that, but I'm just following the example on the Django website. So maybe you can go ahead and read that and give you a little bit more information to help you out. Right, so with that in place, we now just need to go back to our template and make a few changes. So at the moment, well, let's have a look to see what happens at the moment. So if we refresh, we can now see that we only return 8. But what we need now is the pagination option here, so that we can go to different pages. So to add that in, we need to just create a simple bit of code. There's a few items here that we're going to need. For example, we need to be able to click forward. We need to be able to click back, for example. Okay, so that there looks like the main row. So we don't want it in the row, we want it outside of the row. So let's bring it in right here. And just to be super lazy, let's just go back in and see if there's an example, which there is right here. So let's just grab this piece of code here. After all, Django is meant to be super fast. There's nothing more rapid than this, copy and pasting, right? So there we go. So you can see what's happening here. It's providing us a few different tools here. So we can look at previous pages. It's going to then give us information about how many pages. Now notice what is being referenced here, page ob. You can see here, paginated.getPage, it looks like we're getting the number of pages. So this looks like a function that will offer the ability behind the scenes to grab the amount of pages that we have based upon the calculation of how many products are returned divided by 8 on each page. So let's go back in. I think we're good to go there. So let's give this a go. And there we go. So we can now utilize these links to go next, 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 and so on. You can see that they are changing in what page we're on. We can't see what page we're on. And you can't see me clicking next either. Apologies. So at the bottom here, you can see when I press next, it's changing the page. I can go last, I can go first, and so on. So this is just all built into Django. You can go ahead and style it and maybe utilize it on your template. Now that we have this set up, we'll blast through some other queries that we might want to execute on our database, and we'll utilize this as a baseline so that we can not only just demonstrate the queries in the shell, but also actually activate them or utilize them, or implement them into our actual Django project. I will apologize again because I know that potentially there's lots of questions now. Potentially you'd like to know how to do this and that and so on. This was just meant to be a general demonstration of applying that query that we generated, the OR query, into our Django project.